Thank you. Thank you. I suppose you do this all over the world with your travels, though, right?
A little bit, a little bit. So, coming to you from Lusaka today in
Oh,
Zambia.
wow. Now, where is this on the global arena of things? Where is this?
So if you are to look at the African continent, right, you have South Africa here, and Lusaka is like somewhere there.
Are you getting ready to be in Uganda or what? You had some plans to open up a center there, right?
Yeah, in Rwanda. So we do have a pilot program there as well. And then our flagship work is here in Zambia. And I'm one of the co-founders and the executive director of the African Education Program. And our mission is to unlock the potential of African children, youth, and women by building and growing community-led organizations and initiatives that focus on quality and inclusive education, health, and community development.
I was very impressed in looking at your website, which we will include here. But I was very impressed about your inclusion of boys because I do think that that's really critical. And you shift over to adult women, and the boys do what at that point?
Exactly. That's why, there are fantastic initiatives out there that are only for girls. We understand those benefits, but we saw very early on that excluding boys was not a part of our solution, right? Because if you only empower girls, if you only focus on the girls, at the end of the day, they're still going to get married, right? They're still going to be in homes and households with their male counterparts. So we really found that giving girls their own space for certain discussions is very important. Giving the boys their own space, their own, healthy male role models is really important. But really, then the most important is creating these spaces for them to come together, have dialogue, excuse me, and be empowered equally, right? So that at the end of the day, they have equal partnership in their households, in their communities, and in the nation and the region, right?
Right. When I looked at the fact that you got started in 2006 and you're a little high school student, I just am so impressed with your outcomes. And I was looking at some of the outcomes where I wrote them down like 98% of the women in your program, as indicated on your website, are not pregnant before the age of 18. I mean, this nearly brings me to tears. And because you're also devoted to entrepreneurial education, so you're giving people an opportunity to earn more income. And some of you, and you had a 264% increase in income. And this just makes everything so much more livable and viable for everybody that you're working with. So, the last one I just want to bring up is your 90% grade 12 graduation for the people in your program. And I think you're really doing amazing work. But I was just blown away that you little kids in high school started. And I mean, I know high school practically is young adults. I mean, you're 17, 18 years old, you're young adults. But I really want to give our listeners, because a lot of what we focus on in my LinkedIn conversations with leaders is mentoring leaders who mentor leaders. Of you with your little group there in Radnor High School in Pennsylvania. How did you guys come up with this idea? Tell me about the origins, because the origins give crispiness to the possibility that I too could do it. So I'd love to hear your story.
Well, yes, I mean, it's a over 20-year journey, right? That we have been on. And how it all started, I grew up in a very privileged suburb of Philadelphia, in a very, very good public school system. And we grew up fundraising, even in elementary school, pennies for UNICEF, by middle school, jump rope for heart, high school, relay for life, right? These big fundraisers.
Interesting.
And
Yeah,
as
getting kids
kids,
started early.
getting early, and granted, every penny, every dollar helps, right? But when you're a high schooler or a middle schooler, we were just a few friends and I had been thinking about how do we do a service project with a personal connection where we really know, where our hard work, where the money we raise is going to go. So that kind of been in the back of our minds. We'd also noticed a lot of waste in our school and communities, books and computers, just kind of going in the trash. That had kind of been on. And my still one of my best friends to this day, my co-founder Hillary, in 10th grade, came to lunch one day after watching a video about apartheid, and she was really riled up, and she was like, "Why don't we help kids in Africa?" And we're in 10th grade, so right, for us, Africa is one place at this point. And so I had had a Zambian soccer coach for a few years. So we went to my coach. We said, "Hey, we want to help kids from where you're from. We have a few ideas, but like, what do we do?" And he said, "Well, why don't you call my brother Amos? He's a community leader in this place called Kafue, and you figure it out." This was before WhatsApp, before Zoom. You had to get calling cards at gas stations to get like international minutes, right? And we call Amos, and that's how we come up with this project to ship a container of books and computers, from Philadelphia to Zambia. And honestly, like that was the end of the story. That was, our vision was just to ship that container. We became a 501(c)(3) nonprofit because we thought people would give us more money. We weren't even 18, so our parents got the paperwork in the mail saying they have a nonprofit, and that's when they realized we were pretty serious about this project.
And doing that is
And
a
yeah,
big, getting that 501(c)(3) is no small matter. Did you pull together to do that, or how did you do that?
we did. We had a friend's dad was a CPA, and he must have thought we were nuts when we were like, "Hi, Mr. Lincoln, can you help us start a nonprofit?" He's like, "Well, that's not exactly what I do," but
But
that's
even
the
so,
power
that
though of
costs
also
money. So
adults.
the parents were behind you in doing this because there's a filing fee for even doing that. They must have been really promoting your philanthropy and really proud of you guys.
Very much, very, very much. And so,
So you got
but
501(c)(3), and then what happened?
by senior prom, we shipped our container. And even then, that was kind of the end of the story, right? We were very happy. We knew we would receive photos at some point of the goods. And we found out like a little bit before graduation that we were receiving a grant to go and travel and meet the community. And so we elected my mom because she had education, by trade,
Oh, that's great.
a teacher, in education by trade. So we go on this trip, and that's what changes everything. I turned 18. We were meeting our peers, we were meeting community leaders, and they're the ones who said, "Why don't you open a youth center? So all these books, computers can go in one place instead of getting distributed to the various schools where they would be locked up because they were actually too valuable for the
Mm-hmm.
schools."
Mm-hmm.
So then the following year, my mom and I traveled back again and met with community leaders, youth leaders, and we opened this youth center that has been, evolving organically for since 2006. And I mean, what's crazy to think about is we started with 25 youth. I remember a third of the young women were pregnant within the first like 3 months of working with them. And so today, to have statistics like the one you shared that almost none of our young women get pregnant before 18. This year alone, we're reaching over 5,000 children, youth, and women through our various programs. It's just, we never knew we would grow like this.
That sense, it's 30 years, it's 20 years of doing the work, following up, getting the donations, working with the kids, figuring out what the youth need, working with the people both there in Africa and also in your home, and lining everything up. And it's really just step by step by step, and then it has an amazing impact. What would you say about that? I mean, is that how you look at it now, or how do you see it?
You know, um, like many leaders that I'm sure you work with, I think I don't take enough time to take that step back and like celebrate the accomplishments. Like, sure, we had our 20-year anniversary last year. And for example, I hiked Kilimanjaro in celebration of 20 years. I hiked nearly 20,000 feet and raised $20,000. But even that, it was like I wasn't actually taking a step back to reflect. I was climbing a mountain, So it's like,
Also, it's like the burden of going forward and carrying on with all this stuff. You're right in the present for the 25 million problems you still have that haven't been accomplished. You're at a turning point though. 20 years is definitely a turning point. So what would you say is the turning point for you guys, where you've come and where you're going now?
I think the real turning point for us now is we figured out who we are, right? We have figured out what we're good at. We have this incredible, multifaceted, model that is resource intense, right? We're with our kids now as early as the age of 5, all the way through college and university, and then beyond as alumni, right? So we're with them for such a long time. So we do have this model, very resource intense, but works, right? We know it works. And
Mhm.
so what we also now know is we can take pieces of the model and do them elsewhere, again, keeping quality in mind, impact in mind. We're now in a position where, like this pilot in Rwanda, sort of stewarding a founder and a visionary's goals for a project, and how can we help operationally, administratively to accomplish those goals. So I think as an organization, we're very clear on, what we want to do, what we're good at, how we do it. I think the turning point to your comment is how do we become financially sustainable, right? Because you can have all the goodwill, you can have all the good heart,
Right.
but if the, the resources aren't there, you're a dead fish in water. Sorry for the like
No, no,
that
it's true. And
example,
it
right?
feels always like, biting at your heels every second of the way. The
Yeah.
philanthropic path is burdened in that way, typically under resourced, and it's always kind of a collective begging to give people the vision and the impact. You certainly are coming up with some great results here that are going to make your story easier. But I did see that you're engaging also on a capital campaign, and that is pretty incredible. That's a great way of establishing input from your donors and people that are really behind your project. Do you want to speak a little bit about what the plan is for there? Who even drew up the plans for you? You see, even getting an illustrated building is somebody's commitment. I mean, it may be a what do they call it? In kind commitment. It doesn't have money to it, but it does build your bottom line in terms of your assets, because you've had somebody that's given you there a $50,000 rendering of an architectural design that you are using. How did you get that?
Yeah, so that's a great story, and we're very, very excited about this capital campaign. It's been a vision for a while now. Actually, 10 years ago, the local government where we operate in Zambia gave us the land that we're building on as a show of support and faith, in our work. So this has been a dream for a while to get into our permanent home, a space that was custom designed for us with the learning spaces that we need to really like take our impact to the next level. So, very fortunately, we did have a group of volunteer architects to do an initial concept. One being my co-founder, Sarah. She's an architect today, helped spearhead that forward. And then we did engage a Zambian firm, a Zambian-owned firm here in Lusaka to do our final, concept and drawings because it was very important that we have, sort of Zambian teams working with us for this project so
I
that it's
just
truly
stop you right there
localized.
before you go on, because
Yeah.
that is one of the hallmarks of your program that I can see. That you are not only resource intense in sense of taking people from 5 years old to college, but you're also locally based. And to me, when I was looking at it, it isn't just a bunch of, rich white folks over in Philadelphia telling Zambia what they need to be doing with themselves. You are actually going into the local culture and building leadership among the local culture and drawing from them to decide your plans and your next steps and your programming. To me, I think that is the mark of your success. What would you think?
Oh, 100%. say it at least once a week, if not multiple times a week. For me, with the thing that I'm most proud of is the fact that the majority of our full-time team now are alumni of this program, right? They're the ones who have
Amazing.
gone to
Mhm.
university, come back, and they're spearheading this work. They're the visionaries of this work now, not me and the original, co-founders. It's them. And I think to go a little bit back to the capital campaign, that too is what's so important about this building is we could have built it probably for half the cost. And it would have been very simple and it would have looked like all the schools in the area, pretty low resourced. But we wanted this building to push the envelope on how Zambia and the region views educational spaces. That not only the rich kids get to go to a beautiful school, that even the most disadvantaged kids should have access to a space that they're comfortable in, that they can dream in, that they can get creative in, that they can feel good about themselves in, right? And so that's why we also, we really wanted to work with a local team to design this, but also really set a standard for what educational spaces can look like. And so that's what's critical in this capital campaign is we're setting that precedent. We're also trying to raise funds for our financial sustainability, right? An income generating social enterprise, an urban farming learning space so that our families become food secure. That's all built into that campaign. But that's what's so important now is like getting into that space and programmatically, operationally, we're Zambian. I'm not involved in programs anymore. That's all led by this mostly alumni team. And to your point about the turning point, like my job now is the final pieces of this financial sustainability and how can this truly be locally owned? I mean, I dream of the day where I just get to go to Kafue and hang out with kids and go check out the farm and like, I don't have founder syndrome in the least when it comes to this. I'm like so ready to let go of the reins, right?
No
Yeah.
kidding. I love it though. I have the imagery of you walking the gardens with the children. How wonderful is that? How wonderful is that? So okay, so now you're like really at that pivotal point, and you're looking probably into partnerships, people and corporations and other groups that could really underpin you. What is your strategy for this?
Really looking at how we can position ourselves to truly be a partner for corporates or other entities, excuse me, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of companies that do CSR, their corporate social responsibility. They do give back to their communities, whether that's domestically in the US or abroad, right? Um, but when you look at companies, often their CSR is just checking off a box, right? Here in Zambia, it's like, okay, I built that one classroom, I'm done for the year. Or I built that toilet block, I'm done for the year. And it's like, yes, that creates a change, but what kind of long-term change is that really creating? So with AEP, we're looking at how can we position ourselves as a strategic partner for corporates who want to do meaningful corporate social responsibility. And that can align with their strategic plan, right? Corporate social
Absolutely,
responsibility and
absolutely.
strategic planning shouldn't be siloed from each other, right? They can be very much symbiotic and feed into each other. And so the fact that we have this track record, here in Zambia, now in Rwanda, we've been doing it for 20 years. We know what true community building can look like. We're really looking to, strategically position ourselves to corporates who have an interest, whether it's in Zambia or in the region, sub-Saharan region, and truly be a partner, not just a recipient, because that's not what we want.
No, in fact, you'd love to have your entrepreneurial leaders get jobs in these places for experience, get internships, be part of their talent pool, be a segue for interviewing people. I mean, it's very difficult for outside countries to come into Africa and feel like they can put their pulse on talent. Talent is very
Yeah.
hard to surface, as you've noticed yourself. You grew it, and you know these people from very early ages, and you know they're competent, and you know their integrity, you know their trustworthiness. And so I think that in itself is a great asset for anybody coming in to look at your programming and what they could gain from it. I also think you're in a really wonderful time because a lot of people are putting attention on Africa now. You know, the Chinese are very interested in Africa, and the United States is very interested in Africa. And I think that, your challenge is going to hopefully be that you have to maintain this integrity for your people and the local communities, that others aren't just coming in as maybe past models have just kind of ripped off the resources and put the toilets down and gone on. So you're really standing as a protection, actually, against that, and for a more sustainable model and a more wonderful model, actually, for everybody involved. So bravo.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And you hit the nail on the head, both points. We want mutually beneficial relationships, with our corporate sponsors. Like it should be a two-way street. And then 100%, we do not want to be a part of greenwashing or just these check boxes. Safeguarding of our communities is incredibly important as well. So
In the private sector, at this point in development, I mean, like you said, you've got your model, you've got your product, you've got your systems in place. And this is very true for entrepreneurs also. They get all this stuff lined up. And now we're at a point of scaling. And when they get to that point, they're looking at acquisitions, they're looking at partnerships, and they're looking at how they can grow by associating themselves with others. So this is a little different than what we were talking about before, in the sense that it has to do with looking at others in Africa who are doing similar projects, nonprofit, and looking at how you might partner with them. I mean, that's a completely different kind of idea than bringing in, corporate, and maintaining your own individuality. It's really what I would call in the private sector, like growing through acquisition. And that's a different kind of challenge. Have you thought about that, or can you comment on that?
yeah, I think, for us, it's been really important to actually build this partnership ecosystem, right? So we have, for example, what we call thought partners. Those are other nonprofits that are either working in a similar space or a similar region. And for example, with a handful of those founders, I speak regularly with them just to like be soundboards, right? Oftentimes as leaders, we feel isolated. We feel like no one else understands. Well, once you find your community, actually, there's a lot of folks out there that you can lean on. So, we sort of have these thought partners. Then we have our service delivery partners. These are actual partners on the ground that we're working with, together to do some of our programming. And then, we have our funding partners, right? Which we don't just like to call donors, because we, again, are looking for true partnerships, two-way, sort of symbiotic relationships. And so we have been actively building this partnership ecosystem, to see how, we better work together. And because that's where sustainability and true long-term impact lives, right?
Really
I don't want to
true,
recreate
really
a
true.
wheel that's already there. We're already low on resources. So why should I recreate a wheel when there's this great other nonprofit already doing it, right? How do we work together? So
Yeah.
yes, we've definitely been very proactive in building that.
I love the your reflection on the ecosystem, because that's what great entrepreneurial groups are like. They build an ecosystem around it, and they buy from each other, and they support each other, and they provide for each other. I mean, that's really great insight on your part. Self personally, when you look at your own trajectory as a leader, I mean, you started out as a little person, really. I mean, when you look back and how how innocent and young you were. Thank God you had all those parental assets around you, because, I mean, you were going into really unknown territory. But the thing is, you had an open heart, and you had a clarity, and you had a vision of what it is that you wanted to create. And then, of course, the rubber hits the road. So what is it in your own trajectory as a leader that you might share with others who might be interested in doing something like you're talking about? And what have you found are the challenges, and how have you gone through them, and what would you recommend for others?
I think one of the financials aside, right? Because that, especially if you're a nonprofit and also if you're a for-profit, right? Like
Absolutely.
financials are always
You
going
got
to
to build
be a
sales.
challenge.
no matter which way you
Exactly.
go.
Exactly. So it's just that our products are slightly different, right? So
Mhm.
finances aside, I think for me, one of the biggest growth points as a founder and a leader is coming out of that self-sacrificing martyr mentality, right?
I'm
Where
doing something
you
for
are your
you.
org. Everything goes into that, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not sustainable. You can't
Mhm.
be everything to everyone and the organization and working 6.5 days a week. You know how many hours. You're a coach, right? Like it
Mhm.
is not sustainable. And
No.
so, especially in the nonprofit world, I feel like oftentimes it's just expected as a founder or an executive director that a friend of mine, again, another founder, he's like, it's like people expect us to live off the tears of joy of the people we serve, right? It's like we have a little
Yeah,
wallet and
forever,
they cry
forever.
into it.
It's so true.
And we
I
can
mean,
live off
it's
that.
sad but true. The mission does drive you, but I mean, really, let's not drain you dry, right?
Exactly. So, it took a lot of work to get out of that mindset for, you
Mm.
know, to get into a much more empowered mode to even when cash is tight to believe in this abundance in the world, right? And yeah, and to build a life too, right? That my life does not have to be so closely intertwined at all moments, with the organization. And I think again, especially as founders, that can be hard to do. And I was a young founder. I've literally grown up, with my nonprofit. And so, I think from the start, if you can build in some of that muscle, some of those boundaries, with what you're starting up, it'll set you up for success later that, I never would have imagined how hard it could be operating out of that sort of martyr, mindset.
Much easier said than done. And I think every
Yeah.
entrepreneur faces the same thing. It's their baby, it's their responsibility. And if you're providing wages for others or visions for others, I mean, it's very tough to set up those boundaries and not go home just dreading guilt every day.
Oh yeah, I mean it's exactly that. It's your team, it's the communities you serve, it's your donors in the same way that entrepreneurs would have investors. You don't want to let them down. They believed in you.
Right.
Yeah, it's easy. Much easier said than done. Privileged to have support systems, therapists, coaching. I've been very lucky. Fellowships that allowed for coaching, taking those steps into connecting with other founders, right? Like I can't honestly necessarily pinpoint one time that helped transform this. I think I've just been very lucky to have some amazing, people in my life to lean on and who have helped me,
Mhm.
reconstruct my mindset around leadership. So yeah, I've just been very lucky to have the right people in my life. And
So
also
let me,
same, and also parents who keep supporting me, a family that keeps supporting this, right? And loving me
mm,
unconditionally, like as I figure this out.
right,
So
when you look back, what are the things that you would share with others that were the most important leadership lessons that you learned in terms of, not getting involved in the conflicts, steering the conflicts? I mean, you can lose everything in your governance, and I mean everything about how organizations come together and fall apart. So take a look at that just for a minute and share maybe a few of the leadership lessons that you've had that, if you were talking to a younger person, like, and you were saying, you know what, I got into this, I didn't necessarily know what it all involved, but now looking back, I can say that these are the three or four most key understandings that I had that I would like to share with you. And for better or worse, if you can use them, help yourself. What would you say?
and to be honest, I made a lot of mistakes, right? Again, I was growing up with this nonprofit. I hadn't even been to college yet, right, to study international development and specifically focused on Africa. So like I've made a lot of mistakes. I do think first and foremost, listening is one of the most important things you can do, especially if you're working outside of your own context, right? Like I am a white woman from Philadelphia, half French, half American. I did not grow up in the communities that we serve. I cannot claim any, I can claim connection, right? Because I've been working in them for so long, but I'm not from there. I don't know the solutions. I have not, lived through the challenges and the hardship. So I think first and foremost, it's always, always, always listening. Even if you think you have a solution in your head that will work, you cannot impose it, right? You
Mhm.
have to, your first step forward always needs to be listening. And I
Mhm.
think generally, 90% of the time, we've always done that. That's always been very important to us as an organization, right? Working with these local leaders, working with these youth leaders. It's always been hand in hand. But, I was pretty young and
Well,
had
you know,
ideas and wanted
I'm
to,
older. I have to say I'm older, and I'm learning. And I think that if we have that growth set, that personal development set, and we're working with an organization like that similarly, if we continuously show up like that in our organizations and for ourselves, and thank God you didn't have all that stuff of the international development education because you couldn't depend on it and it was probably flawed anyway. You wouldn't have been listening as deeply. So yeah, well, I would just say one of the learnings that you've just shared is fail and fail repeatedly and
Yes,
correct yourself through your through your listening. Don't feel like it's going to be perfect and one and done kind of thing, right? So what else
it's
would you
not.
say
It's
besides
not.
listening? I think that's a great one. And the fact that we're always growing and developing. I love that as well. So we're always young
Yeah,
in
thank you.
our, eternally
Yes,
youthful.
we have to be, and we have to continue to be curious, right? We have to continue to ask questions. This is an ever-going journey, I think is critical. A second lesson, this is particularly for anyone in the nonprofit space. I really wish we'd focused on financial sustainability from day one, right? Of course, vision's always in hindsight 2020, right? Because we were so focused on every dollar going to the kids, and that was important at the time, right? Especially when there's this standard of organizations with more than 15% overhead aren't operating well, misconceptions in the space. But the fact that we also were like, no, every dollar needs to go to programs. I wish we had thought about financial sustainability. When I look at how much money, for example, we spent on cab rides and people chauffeuring us around, we could probably have a fleet of like 10 cars here in Zambia, right? And have asset, not that cars are a great asset, but you know what I mean? We could at least be
Mhm.
owning our transportation instead of today still paying out taxis and drivers, right?
Mhm.
I wish we'd thought about even buying land or property or putting aside 10 cents on the dollar to just go into a portfolio, right? And
Mhm.
start, accruing, even if it's small amount of interest, it's still, right, an asset. And
Mhm.
so I just wish we had focused on financial sustainability sooner. And again, that's really hard. It's hard when you're so passionate about the mission and the work and the community, right? You want everything to go to them, but it's going to limit, I think, at the end of the day, your long-term impact and how long you can keep going, right? So that's
That's
a
a
lesson
really
too. I really wish we focused on.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I was quite impressed with your website when I saw you're receiving donations of cryptocurrency, you're setting up legacy payments, and you got it all there ready to receive, which I thought was actually farther than many nonprofits even show themselves. They just have their little donor box and God help us if you put anything in there. And so I love that this recognition now of the sustainability. What else would you say? I love these comments. I love it. They're going to be very helpful to others to hear.
I'm thinking the big one, I mean, you already said it, right? Is like learn from you're gonna make mistakes. Learn from your
Yeah,
mistakes, right?
yeah,
Like, but also um you have to trust your gut, right? At the end of the day, I think as leaders, at least the kind that I am, I'm always questioning myself, right? And if I make a decision, I'm still going to like circular think around it for the next 2 days. And did I do that right? Or should I be more worried about this? And to be honest, lately, I've really just been trying to kind of lean into that spiritual faith again, like this is a place of abundance and we're going to make it. Like, the things are going to come. I'm making the right decisions because I'm making them with intention. I'm making them with the best interests of the organization in mind, right? And I think that too, like we can often just be in the scarcity mindset and just
Mm.
be so focused on like, I only have 3 months of cash in the bank, so I can't make an expansion move. I think too for nonprofits, that's where we're held so differently accountable than for-profits, right? For-profits can take risks and nonprofits can't. But we can't keep operating that way. It doesn't work, right?
That's a
So I think
really,
just
really good distinction. I mean, getting out of that poverty mindset. And I don't know, maybe, I don't know, in terms of the successful for-profits have to run fast to stay in place too. And I'm not sure, it's really a good point that you're making, is that in both cases, I feel deeply it's got to be in a can do, we're going to do it, and if we go bust, we're going bust running full out. It's go big or or whatever, close shop. So I mean, not in a reckless way, but
no, of course not.
in a way that you're talking about. And I do feel that that is very inhibiting to nonprofits, because what are they talking about, nonprofits? They shouldn't even use that term. It's such an old-fashioned term. You're building an organization that has a social benefit, is basically what it is. And you need money flowing through the organization, just like any organization, to be really fulfilling your mission, just like anybody that is any kind of organization, really. I love that. I think that's really a good caution for everybody, seriously.
I guess the one thought, I know we've been like having such like honest conversation and getting in, to some of the nitty-gritty. I think too, often as leaders, whether you're for profit or nonprofit, it's like you think you need to be perfect all the time, right? And you need to be on all the time. And in reality, it's like we're vulnerable people, I'm definitely I'm an empath. I think like I'm emotional. Very sensitive to energy, and it's like I'm not always having a great day. And yes, when you're serving disadvantaged communities, you have to be very careful, right? Like what can come out and what can't. But when it comes to my team, I want everyone to be vulnerable and open and honest about like where they're at. But I realize I have to be that way too. I can't be perfect Miss Julianne who's always on point and like then they're going to expect to be the same. And I think it's really important as leaders that we give ourselves the space and the grace to actually be humans and not these superhumans running these entities, again, whether it's for profit or nonprofit, right? And I think just allowing ourselves to just be ourselves is so important.
That's a really good point. And I want to say something that I have actually, I'm getting this a different view. I have noticed in our conversation together, and that is something that isn't often, it's kind of linked to mission, but it's not actually, kind of gets drained off through the work and so forth. But what's really present in you is that clear love for what you're doing, and the clear love for your programming, and the clear loving for the children and everything that you've been able to achieve. And in the end of the day, I don't know, I think that love is kind of the elixir of everything that we do. And it's kind of the healing thing. So that even if you don't make it, or even if you fall on your face, or even if you're vulnerable, or if you're hugely successful, that peace that you show up in the garden with those children, that is the driving love that's really creating whatever you're creating on a day-to-day basis, on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis. You're just showing up with that open heart and pouring it into people, and they are allowed to give it back to you. And to me, that's just the joy of life, you know.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for seeing that and it's exactly right, and that's what keeps it going, right? That's what keeps us going through the mistakes, through the failures, right? Is those successes, is those human connections, is seeing the change, right? it's really what does fuel us to continue on. So
I love
thank
it,
you for
Julian.
saying
I
that.
think you're doing a great job. And I celebrate leaders like you all across the world, and you in particular, and the team and everything you've grown. I wish you the greatest success. I see your capital campaign, raising a huge sustainability, and I'll be reading about it in the press, and how you've put together the sustainability model that's going to be able to be replicated all across Africa. Wouldn't that be the mission? I love it.
That would be amazing. Thank you, thank
You're
you.
doing
Thank
it,
you for
girl.
having this conversation with me.